Good evening, viewers and listeners. Welcome to another edition of this program, Serving the People, brought to you every Wednesday at 6:30 p.m. on SVG TV by me, your host, Mrs. Anissa Batiste, Senator for the New Democratic Party. Please let us start with a word of prayer. Loving Father in heaven, we thank you for your blessings, and I ask you now that you would please give me the enlightenment of truth to share with the people, that they may be duly served by knowing the truth on the issues that we will deal with. In Jesus' name, amen. And now, dear viewers and listeners, let me remind you that if you wish to contact me, you may call the telephone number 528-1015, or you may send an email. The address is servingthepeople.ab@gmail.com. I'll repeat the information at the end for your assistance. Now, before we go into this evening's discussions, I'd like to deal with a few preliminary issues. First of all, let me just point out that last week's program was a repeat program. I imagine some of you may have recognized this. We didn't have a new program last week. It was a repeat. Secondly, I'd like to make mention of the fact that the New Democratic Party recently concluded its annual convention that was held on Sunday, 20th of November 2011. And I'd like to point out two issues just to let you know that concerning myself, Anissa Batiste, I was nominated for two positions, for the position of chairman along with Mr. Cummings, Daniel Cummings, and Mr. Lewis. I was not successful. I was also nominated for the position of Assistant Secretary, which I respectfully declined in order to give support to my fellow West St. Georgian, Mrs. Doris McIntosh. And thirdly, by way of preliminary issues, I wish to express heartfelt thanks to the Constituency Division of the West St. George constituency for the New Democratic Party for having elected me overwhelmingly on the 17th of November, Thursday, 17th November 2011, to be their candidate for the New Democratic Party in any upcoming general elections. I am truly grateful for the overwhelming support I received that night. There were about 46 persons in attendance, and all of them voted for me. And I'm grateful, and I pledge to work very hard along with you all to secure the West St. George seat for the New Democratic Party in our next elections. So I look forward to working with you, the people of West St. George. And now, let us go into this evening's program. What do we want to look at? In this evening's program, I hope to look at two segments. The first segment, I want to address an issue arising from the most recent sitting of the House of Parliament. That would have been on the 22nd of November, Tuesday, 22nd November, 2011. In that sitting, we had our usual question time. And I'd like to pay attention to question number 20, which was asked by me of the Honorable Minister of Social Development, Frederick Stevenson. And to let you know what the question was and his response, because it brings to the fore a very important area which I find has been seriously neglected by the ULP administration over the last 2 years at least. And I'd like to make mention of it because it is a serious matter indeed. It has to do with the Home Help Care Providers Program. And this program is one whose objective, as written in the estimates, is to provide urgent and meaningful care to the elderly poor. A very important social program indeed, which falls under the Ministry of Social Development. Now, I asked the question of the Honorable Minister concerning this program. It was in three parts. Part A, whether there has been any training and employment of home help care providers to date for the year 2011. Part B, if so, how many have been trained and how many have been employed. And Part C, has there been any assessment this year of this program among its beneficiaries? Now, these questions mirrored particularly the result indicators or the objectives which the Ministry of Social Development had outlined in the estimates for 2011 that they had hoped to achieve under this program. And I wanted to find out at basically the end of November 2011, whether or not the ministry and the minister had accomplished his objectives. Basically, the answers given were as follows. The minister said that there had been no training and no employment of home health care providers for the year 2011. He also said that no assessment had been done so far this year among the beneficiaries, but he went on to indicate that he hopes to have 20 new trained persons between now, which is 22nd of November when I was asking the question, between then and December, and also that there was plans in place to have assessment by December 2011. Very hard to believe when you consider the year is already up, or basically almost up, and nothing has been done. Now, why is this an area of particular concern? When you think about providing urgent and meaningful care to the elderly poor, it's a very sensitive area. When we think of our elderly poor, when we think of these categories of persons, they are very vulnerable. They're among the weakest in society. And it is clear that the very minister and his ministry would have recognized the need to boost up this program from the previous year. And why do I say this? If you look in the estimates for 2011, when you go back to 2010, you would observe that they had planned to train and employ 15, that's right, 15 more home health care providers. However, when you looked at the status of the result indicators, it said that they had not accomplished this. So for the year 2010, they trained none. They targeted training 15, but they trained none by the end of 2010. So for the year 2011, they indicated that they would train and facilitate the employment of a further 30 home health care providers by August 31st, 2011. So in addition to the 15 who were not trained and employed in 2010, the Ministry of Social Development indicated that it would train an additional or a further 30. So that would be 45 to be trained and employed in the year 2011. And lo and behold, up to November 22nd, when I asked the question of the Honorable Minister, there had been no training whatsoever, no employment whatsoever of the 45 home health care providers who should have been trained and employed over the year 2010 as well as the year 2011. Also, another of the indicators said that they should conduct a survey with at least 100 beneficiaries for a periodical assessment of the program by June 30th, 2011. And again, when I asked the question whether or not such assessment had been done, the minister replied that none had been done for the year. Not only does this show a failure to achieve the indicators set out, but it's a failure over the last 2 years, and I want to point that out. Now, how much priority and importance is being given to such a very important area? Where we have elderly poor, some are bedridden, are in their homes, they can't move about, they do not have persons to assist them, and home health care providers whom the state says it would train and employ to carry out these services for the elderly poor among us, the work is not being done by them. It shows poor planning, poor budgeting, and it shows an overall inability, a lack of capability in terms of carrying out this program. Financially, it is clear that the money was not there for the training and that the money wasn't there for the employment of these 45 additional home health care providers to assist in this very important area. The very fact that the ministry raised its numbers to 30 for 2011 from 15 in 2010, which they hadn't trained nor employed, the very fact that they raised the numbers showed that they saw there was a need for it. But lo and behold, 2011 is almost finished, and we have neither the 15 that were supposed to have been trained in 2010, nor the additional 30 who should have been trained in 2011. And their targets are gone. The August 30th and the June 30th targets that were set were not met. This is a very serious matter, and it is an indictment, in fact, on the Ministry of Social Development when it comes to the promises that would have been made, the budgetary allocations that would have been put aside for this program. Nothing has been done. This is unacceptable, and I want to throw out a message to you, our dear people, those of you who are under this program in one way or the other, whether working or should have been working, or persons who have not been able to benefit or who stopped benefiting because of not having persons trained and employed to come around, I want you to contact me and let's talk about this, because it's a very important matter and area. 528-1015 is the number. 528-1015. Whenever a government cannot take care of its most vulnerable, whenever a government fails to support and to care for the weakest in its society and under its watch, it is a serious indictment on that government's capability generally to serve its people. And I want to reflect seriously on this particular program, because I want you to understand just how the general overall poor management of the finances of this country impacts upon the people directly, including and especially the most vulnerable and weak among us. Now, having said that, I wish to move into an area that has become very important for me to discuss with you on this program. In reflecting on a program that I sat on over the last, I would say it was 2 weeks ago, I was on the New Times program on a Friday afternoon, and there was a telephone call from a female caller who spoke about the general difficulty of the poverty situation, unemployment. She seemed to be a young caller, and she lamented the fact that there are persons who are very young, who are also qualified from school, having certain number of subjects, but can't get a proper job. But what struck me about the information she gave in the call was the fact that she indicated that some of the temptations out there for persons in situations like that, including herself, because she spoke from a personal experience, was a temptation to get involved in human trafficking. Yes, my dear people, this female caller actually said to us, I was with Mr. Ernesto Cook, PRO, new PRO for the New Democratic Party. She actually said to us that she was encouraged and invited to consider getting involved in human trafficking, traveling overseas for the purposes of basically being trafficked to get money, to earn money. And it struck my mind in a very serious way, because I recognize that this is an area that could become more and more of an attractive sort of temptation to persons who are in poverty situations or who are also frustrated by the unemployment situation and generally. And I want to speak about it a bit. In particular, I would like to let you know what pertains in St. Vincent and the Grenadines when it comes to the issue of human trafficking. I went on to tell that young lady that day that we do have laws against this crime, and that she must not yield to such temptation, and she must discourage her friends and others who may be thinking about it from doing so, because it is a very serious crime under our laws and a very serious crime internationally that comes with heavy penalties. Recently in the House of Parliament, it was the 29th of September 2011, St. Vincent and the Grenadines passed its Prevention of Trafficking in Persons Bill, so it's now law, the Prevention of Trafficking in Persons Act of 2011. Yes, now this piece of legislation is a very important one, and in the next couple of minutes that we have on this program, I'd like to give you some more information about it. First of all, let me tell you what our law defines trafficking in persons as. And this is very important because you see, normally when people think of trafficking in persons, they immediately think of transporting individuals for sexual exploitation, etc. But I want you to recognize in this definition that it doesn't only involve transporting an individual from one place to another for to sexually abuse them or exploit them, but it also involves recruiting persons for that purpose. In other words, you can be engaged, a person can be engaged in human trafficking right here in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. It could be in a job situation, it could be in an arrangement between neighbors. It doesn't always have to involve taking the person from one place to another overseas. Listen to this definition. Trafficking in persons means the recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons by means of the threat or use of force or other means of coercion, of abduction, of fraud, of deception, of the abuse of power, or of a position of vulnerability, or of giving or receiving of payment or benefits to achieve the consent of a person having control over another person for the purpose of exploitation. Now, it's a long definition, and it is a discussion I'd like us to continue. But look at what it says. It talks about recruitment, transportation, transfer, harboring, or receipt of persons. So it could include somebody recruiting an individual on a job, a person, by means of the threat or use of force. So you recruit them, you threaten them with a situation. It tells us of the abuse of power or of a position of vulnerability. Now, what is one of the positions of vulnerability that a person can abuse? Or what do we mean when we say position of vulnerability, abusing position of vulnerability? I remember when we were going through this bill, I sat on the select committee, and when we were defining position of vulnerability, I was looking at the Antigua law, the Prevention in Human Trafficking Act of Antigua, and I saw that they had certain things we didn't have in our draft bill, and I recommended certain of the provisions in the Antigua law. And one of the recommendations which I made on select committee got accepted by the select committee and ended up in the law. And it had to do with the fact that I felt we needed to add, like the Antigua law, the socio-economic circumstances of the person. We needed to add that as one of the things that should be included in that expression, abuse of position of vulnerability. You see, a person's socio-economic circumstances could make them vulnerable. Think of the call from the young lady. Poverty. You're not working. You have all these subjects, you're frustrated, you're not working. Your socio-economic circumstances could be seen as something to be that makes you vulnerable, and a person could look at that and seek to abuse it by taking advantage of it. So they come to you with a proposal or an offer, and they say, well, you can make money, I can help you make money, all you have to do is this. And then they entice you into getting involved in allowing yourself to be exploited. And that is human trafficking. And that can happen right at your back door. It could happen right in your neighbor's house. It could happen on the job. It could happen in a job scenario. It can happen right here. It doesn't have to involve you being transported from one country to another or over the seas, as we would say. And I really want to point that out. Now, there are also what you call, well, we should really look at the crime. What is the criminal offense? In other words, what is the fine or the imprisonment term that goes along with this crime? We are told in our law in section 5 that a person who engages in, conspires to engage in, attempts to engage in, assists another person to engage in, or organizes or directs another person to engage in trafficking in persons, commits an offense and is liable on conviction, on indictment, to a fine of $250,000 or to imprisonment for 15 years or both. Yes, $250,000 if you are convicted, or 15 years in jail, or the two of them. This is a serious matter. And notice it speaks about persons who engage in it, who assist other persons to become engaged in it. So don't think you're going to get off because you just were on the side of it. And this is a serious matter. Regardless of how hard things are, I am warning and encouraging you, do not get yourself mixed up in human trafficking. It is a serious criminal offense and it carries heavy penalties. I just want to point out a few other things about the law, and like I said, we can go into it in more detail on other occasions. We are told that there are aggravated circumstances which, if they exist in the trafficking of the person, the fine or the imprisonment term could be even greater. And one of the aggravating circumstances is if the victim is a child. In other words, it's one thing to traffic a person if the victim being trafficked has not attained the age of 18. If it's a child, it's seen as an aggravated circumstance, and the penalty for that is the court may impose an additional term of imprisonment of up to 20 years. So, in addition to that 15 years, you can get an additional term of 20 years. That's 35 years altogether. Now, my dear people, this is no joke and nothing to play around with. Things might be hard and your circumstances may be difficult, but don't make it worse by getting involved in human trafficking. Now, it tells us other things. Under aggravated circumstances, again, one of the areas I was able to contribute to, looking at the Antigua law, and it was added, it is section 8, subsection 1, clause C. The trafficking involved a victim who is particularly vulnerable, including a pregnant woman. This was a proposal from myself on select committee. I said one of the aggravating circumstances should be that if the victim is a pregnant woman, that is an aggravating circumstance that should be in our law. So that it's one thing to traffic a human person. If the individual is a pregnant woman, it is considered an aggravated circumstance which would cause the person who is convicted to get an additional term of imprisonment term, that is, of 20 years. The court may impose that, the law says. Okay, but the law tells us so many other things. For example, if you look at section 9 of the law, and I want to send a warning here, it says that the consent or the past sexual behavior of the victim is irrelevant. In other words, you can't argue in court if you're charged that, oh, the girl wanted to do it, she wanted to be trafficked, so I went along. No, the consent of the victim is irrelevant in this matter. Trafficking in persons is a crime, whether the person went along or not. Because you see, as we said before, a person could be threatened into it, a person's vulnerability could be abused, their socioeconomic circumstances. So the law says we're going to protect the victim, even if the victim consented. We recognize consent could be forced out of the person, consent could be based on the circumstances. You, the criminal, you're going to pay, and the consent of the victim is not going to be considered by the court. Also in section 10, it says the legal age of consent to sex or to marriage is not a defense to the offense of trafficking in persons. So you might say, well, she's old enough, she could have sex, so I didn't break the law. Oh yeah? Well, the Trafficking in Human Persons Prevention Act of St. Vincent and the Grenadines says that even if the person has reached legal age of consent to sex, that is no defense to you. That is no defense for the person who is being charged. Okay? So these are some of the things that the law deals with, and we can't go into all the details. You have areas that deal with the fact that if an individual knowingly receives financial benefit from a trafficking arrangement, they are committing an offense. In other words, you didn't traffic the person directly, but you knowingly collected money that came out of a trafficking arrangement. You set it up, or you helped to set it up, or you collect money because you gave information, or you chose out the girl, or whatever the case is, or boy as the case may be. You are committing an offense. Now, these things must be explained further to our people, because this is a serious crime. It's a serious matter. Let me tell you something. In Antigua passed their trafficking law last year. Okay, just 2010, and already there's an Antiguan lady facing 20 years in prison for human trafficking. That news came out on November 23rd, 2011. This person, if charged, will be the first person to be convicted under the Trafficking in Persons Prevention Act of 2010 of Antigua. The lady is being charged for allegedly sexually exploiting 17 victims, and that person can pay up to $400,000 EC dollars in fine or 20 years in prison in Antigua. So it is not far from our doorsteps, and laws are being implemented. So I want to encourage you, my dear people. I know it may not be easy to say. Your situation might be hard. Your life may be difficult. You can't make ends meet. You can't get a job. You studied so hard in school. It seems like an opportunity. You can make easy money. But please, I beg you, do not sell yourself like that. Do not get involved in human trafficking. And those of you who think you can get away easily, the law is there. And I hope that the relevant authorities would see to it that it is brought down upon any alleged persons who get involved in this crime. Remember that your body was created by God, and you have a responsibility before Him to safeguard it from all these defilements. Don't let anybody use you and destroy you like that. And be encouraged. Look at these 2 videos about the issue and take note of the messages that are being sent. This is a problem around the world, and it is a problem in the region as well. And if we're not careful, it could become a very serious problem in St. Vincent and the Grenadines. Take a look at these videos.
Thousands of young women are taking jobs abroad, hoping to find a better life. But for many, the reality is really different. They're forced to work as prostitutes for little or no money in towns all over the world. The victims are simply young people who want to escape poverty and unemployment.
Yes, I'm sure you would have seen those things. Now, I want to remind you that if you wish to contact me here at Serving the People, you may call me. The telephone number is 528-1015, and the email address is servingthepeople.ab@gmail.com. Until our next program, take care, be careful, keep yourself from all these criminal evils. And remember that nothing is impossible with God. Trust Him and learn to depend upon Him for help. And there are persons out there who are genuine, who may be able to help you. Don't give up, throw your hands in the air and tell yourself you have no other choice. That is not so. What may seem impossible with man is possible with God. We love you. We need our young people. We need our people. We don't want you to get involved in things that would destroy your life forever. So take care. Call me if you need to, 528-1015, and may God richly bless you. Amen.